Okay, so let's give it a start, right? Thank you very much for coming again. So it is the second last lecture in the ARIVE XR lecture series. So we have, and it's also the second talk by the University of Queensland, and Arindam Day is going to talk about collaborative AR and the combination of a collaborative AR or XR and empathic computing. And that's, I'm just handing over to you, Arindam.
Thanks, Holger. All right, so welcome everyone. I'm going to talk about our work on empathic collaboration XR. So most of the work that I'll present today is done when I was a postdoc with Mark in ESA, but I'm continuing this line of work, but not so much in collaboration that I have to I can show from UQ, but this is something that I can show now. Right, so when we collaborate in real world, there are a few things that we can easily get from the other collaborators, right? For example, their body language, the way they're talking to us, and their gaze, and many other things. Those are subtle cues that give us information about the other person's emotional state at any point in time. And that can help us generate some kind of compassion or empathy towards the other person, and we can tweak our mode of interaction with them in a certain way. But when we think about collaborating over video conferencing, for example, or other AR, VR mediated mediums, so we cannot, a lot of these cues go missing, right? Now, the work that we have been doing in Empathic XR and collaboration is to bring those kind of implicit cues or some subtle information about the collaborators into the application, so people can get more information about the other person's emotional cognitive state. And so this is a very well-known saying from Alfred Adler that seeing with the empathy is basically seeing with the eyes of another and listening with the ears of another and feeling with the heart of another. Right. So overall, it is about experiencing the reality of the other person that you are working with, or putting yourself in someone else's shoe. And how can you do that in XR? This is something that we have been researching. So, empathic computing has basically three components. First thing is about understanding, which is basically how can the system understand someone's emotional cognitive state, right? And the second thing is about experiencing it. So how can system help you experience this kind of scenario or your current environment better? And then how can you share these feelings and emotions between multiple people, or even if you're experiencing a particular environment, how you can share that environment with someone who is not with you. Right, so we can enable this understanding with the use of various sensors like heart rate sensor, galvanic skin response sensor, or EEG to measure your brain waves, and there are various other sensors as well. But for the experiencing and sharing part, we can use extended reality. So the work that that we are doing is basically combination of empathic computing and extended reality. So I call it Empathic XR, right? So, but in the past, there have been many others who have found virtual reality to be a very good tool to share empathy. Like, for example, Chris Milk from Within. So he said that virtual reality is the ultimate empathy machine, and which is true, because in VR you can create scenarios that you cannot create in real life. It's beyond the rules of physics and other things. You can create things in VR, and you can create whatever emotional or affective state that you want to create. Now that brings to our topic of Empathic XR, where is so we use this kind of a motivation to bring in to this kind of system. And in my view, empathy extended reality is a system that can measure, share, and adapt to and manipulate emotion and cognition in real time, right? And we can do this using various physiological, neurological sensors, plus by measuring their behavioral attitudes like speech, posture, their movement. All of these things can be used to detect that emotional cognitive state, and then it can be used to do various things in XR. Now, next I will show a few of the work that we have done in the past. But before that, there are some other people who have worked on this kind of area. So, for example, Falnofer in 2015, they found that virtual environments can evoke certain emotional change, right? They created a different kind of park environment, and then they changed the lighting conditions and some other elements into that park, and they found that you can basically change someone's emotional response to this stimuli. So VR can do that. And a few years ago, from the physiological feedback sharing point of view, Tan et al., they shared physiological feedback like heart rate and GSR measurements to another collaborator in a video conferencing setup. It was not VR or AR, but in video conferencing setup. But they found when that physiological cues were shared, there are higher amount of co-presence between the remote collaborators. And it recently from MIT, they did another study where they found that they created a system called emotional beast or something, where you can, based on your current emotional state, the avatar of the in VR changes its appearance, right? So it grows here if you have a higher amount of arousal, and it glows differently. So it's another way of expressing your emotion in VR. And they have found that by doing this, they could increase the enjoyment in the VR environment. So all of these things hinge towards the applicability and usefulness of using physiological sensors and providing emotional feedback in virtual reality environments, right? So this is one of the work we did a few years ago, where we created 2 different games. To collect butterflies in an open field, which is a bit calm experience, whereas the other experience was a bit more scary, and you need to really shoot to survive. And it was a collaborative setup, but we provided heart rate feedback from the player to the observer. So I'll show you a video that will explain the setup in a bit more detail. So hopefully it works. Right, so we have to. It just worked a little while ago. Oops, sorry. So I think it will work without the presentation mode.
In this research, we explore the effects of sharing physiological states of players in collaborative virtual reality gameplay. Our goal is to improve and enhance users' empathy among collaborators, especially in a remote setting using advanced computer interfaces. To support this study, we developed a collaborative VR framework which shares the player's position and heart rate to the observer in a virtual environment. The observers view the game from the player's position, but can rotate their head freely to look around. The player's heart rate is measured by a biometric glove. The measured heart rate is shared with the observer using both visual and audio cues. We developed 2 games based on this framework. The first game provides a calm and pleasing experience where the player catches butterflies while surrounded by nature. The second game presents a scary and stressful situation where the player tries to survive zombie attacks. We conducted a study to learn the effects of displaying the player's heart rate to the observer. From the insights gathered in this study, we present a set of guidelines for designing collaborative VR experiences.
Right. Yeah. So based on this this setup, we ran a study to find out what kind of effect providing the heart rate feedback has on the overall experience. All right. So what we found was that so we collected different kinds of data. First, we collected the raw heart rate, of course, and then they responded their emotional effect by using the positive and negative affect schedule. So this is basically a very well validated and used scale that has about 20 different feelings and emotions and grouped into positive and negative affect in 10 different emotions in each. And then we also collected their relative head orientation. So because what we did in the setup, both of these player and the observer shared the same body, but they had different head rotation, just to avoid any kind of motion sickness. And then what we found that so what is the difference between the gaze of the player and the gaze of the partner there, right? So that was the relative head orientation. So what we found was when we provided the heart rate feedback, it created higher positive effect, and there were more communication between the users when we had the heart rate feedback shared. But because in this game, the observer did not have any opportunity to interact with the game besides just talking to the player, so they wanted a bit more interaction in it, right? And we also noticed some differences in their relative head orientation as well, but it was more in for the shooting game where they had to really look around and shoot zombies. There were more difference into their head orientation versus in the butterfly collection game. It was a bit more calm experience. So they had a bit more similar direction of gaze, right? So based on this, we moved on to the next study, where so in this particular in the last study, what we used for the feedback is the audio-visual feedback, but then we thought there are many other senses that we have, and how about we use those senses to provide the feedback. So we did another study, which was a single user study, which I'm not presenting here. And in that study, we tried to find out what type of multisensory feedback is more preferred by the participants. And we found that audio haptic feedback to be more sought after, because most of the participants complained about the heart rate being in front of them, so it is a bit more distracting. So in this study that I'm going to talk about now, we use that audio haptic feedback as opposed to the audio visual feedback, right? And the haptic feedback was enabled using the Vive controllers. So in this one, we created, and also in the last one, because participants said that they needed more interaction. So in this one, both of the experimenter and the participant, both of them had interaction, had to do something. So we created 3 different environments here. One is an escape room game. If you have played it, you probably know that the game is basically you have to find clues in the environment in a certain amount of time to get out of the room, otherwise you get locked. The second environment, and this environment, it was both of them had to play kind of a same type of role. They had to find things together, so the power balance between those two were same. And the second environment we created was more of an exploration. So 2 of the collaborators, they were going through a VR environment, and there are various different kinds of environments were there, but it did not involve a lot of active interaction. They could have talked to each other to just if we just go on a walk with our partner, we talk to each other, right? So they could have done the same, but there was nothing more to do. And we created a third environment where they had to arrange furnitures in a room, right? And in that case, one of the users, so the experimenter played the role of an instructor, whereas the participant played the role of the follower. So there was a difference in their power, right? So we created 3 different kinds of environments, and I'll just quickly show how the furniture arrangement can look like. But then again, it will probably not run. This is quite strange. So okay, here. So here you do not have any feedback. All right, so created that. Yeah, so we compared between providing the feedback versus not providing the feedback, and it was it was a mixed factorial design where the group of so the feedback was between subject variable. So one group got the feedback, other group didn't. So what we found in terms of again the positive and negative effect schedule, which we use a lot in most of our studies. So we found some effect of the heart rate feedback being not provided. So the positive and negative effect ratio is a ratio where we measure for a unit negative effect how much positive effect was generated. So if it is a higher value, that means it's better. So we did not find any difference in terms of the feedback, but we found the environment where there was not enough interaction involved, or the expression environment, it had a significantly less positive to negative effect ratio than the other environments, particularly when the heart rate feedback was not provided. But when the feedback was provided, the difference was not as much. Similarly, when we looked at the negative effect change from their baseline condition, we found that by not providing the heart rate feedback, their negative effect increased a lot. All right, so it was significant. And also the change of negative effect to positive effect ratio, again, we found that when the heart rate feedback was not provided, the ratio changed dramatically between or significantly between these 2 conditions. So it shows again the value of adding this kind of feedback, physiological feedback in the scene. And also in terms of social presence, we did not notice any significant difference of the feedback, but we found the environment where there was not a lot of interaction involved, it received a lower rating in terms of social presence, which is quite expected because the people didn't really have to talk to each other and interact a lot. So the social presence was not as high. So after this, now so after we did the studies, we also realized that, okay, now we can provide the heart rate feedback between the users. How about if we manipulate the feedback? So this study was, this particular slide is showing a study that we did for a single user setup where the user got their own heart rate feedback, but we manipulated it between in 5 different levels, starting from -30 to +30% of increase or decrease. So, so again, we found that there are 5 different emotions or feelings that can be manipulated, right? So there are interest, excitement, scariness, nervousness, and fear can be manipulated by manipulating the heart rate feedback. Now we thought that, okay, we found this in a single user setup, but how about if we take it to a collaborative setup, right? So we then created a similar study like the earlier one, but here we had only 2 environments. And one environment was more active, where they had to again shoot various zombies and other creatures to survive. and the other one was more passive, where they did not really have to interact a lot, but could travel in the VR scene. And the manipulation, we had between -20 to +20. So because in the earlier study, in the single user study, we found that when it moves to +30 level, people can understand that this is manipulated. But so we found that +20 to -20 sort of a sweet spot where we can manipulate, but people wouldn't really feel the manipulation or perceive the manipulation when they're doing the task. So this is a few different dependent variables or measures that we used. Now, in this particular study, both of the participants were getting the heart rate feedback of one another, and it was manipulated, but they did not know that it was manipulated. So for both of them had to respond to the PANA scale for themselves and for their collaborator, what they perceive the emotional feelings of the collaborator would be. And similarly, another scale we used is self-assessment mannequin, which is a pictorial scale, which has 3 different levels of arousal, valence, and dominance, and there are pictures. So the scale can be between 5 to 9 level, right, with different pictures. So we used that, and they had to respond it for themselves and for their collaborator. And there are a few other measures that we collected at that time, which they had to respond just for themselves, but not for their collaborator, is the social presence and the inclusion of other in self scale. That's another validated questionnaire that basically measures how 2 people feel connected to each other, right? And then there are some other questionnaires, and we also measured their raw heart rate. So again, it was between subject participant with the 12 groups, and it really took a long time because it was within subject. So then, and we had about 6 different stimuli they had to go through. So it took about 2 hours from starting from setup and going through all of these environments. Right. Again, we also provided the similar audio haptic feedback in this one as well. So for the so the results were quite interesting in this. So for the PANA scale, what we found for the passive environment, where they did not have to really interact a lot, but they're just traveling in the scene, when they responded for themselves, we found that the +20 manipulation caused more scariness and nervousness, right, than the -20. So it kind of shows that the manipulation of heart rate feedback can create different kind of emotional response in PR, right? And similarly, for when they responded for their partner, we found that the partner was, or they thought their partner was more excited when they're playing the active environment, where the shooting game. Right now, we don't know the exact reason behind that. It's something we probably need to look further into. But that was also quite interesting. So then for the social presence, we noticed, and quite expectedly, that the active environment caused higher social presence in overall, and also for the subscales of social presence. And it totally makes sense, because there people had to really work with each other to survive, right? So they had to interact a bit more. Then for the self-assessment mannequin, when they responded for themselves, we found that in the passive environment, it was rated higher for valence and arousal. So valence is basically a sort of a bipolar scale from positive to negative. So if your valence is higher, means you're feeling more positive versus negative, and arousal is the extent of that positive and negative emotion. So yeah, in the passive environment, it was rated higher for valence and arousal, but for the active environment, it was rated higher for dominance. So people felt more in control when they were playing the active environment. And when they rated the same thing for their partner, we noticed that in the passive environment, they also rated their partner to have higher valence and arousal when they're playing the passive environment, and also so we found that they thought their partner have higher valence than themselves when they are playing when they're in the passive environment. Again, like in the last time, we found that they thought their partner to have more higher excitement when they're collaborating. And here we have seen that they have found their partner to have higher positive emotions, right? And then for activity, again, we found a similar kind of result that they also thought their partner has higher dominance when they're playing the active environment. Right. And again, quite expectedly, for the inclusion of other in self-scale, we noticed that in the active environment, they found their partner to be more connected to them. Right. And here we noticed a trend for the raw heart rate. So in the active virtual environment, it caused significantly higher heart rate, which is expected because they had to really do more action, they had to shoot, and they had to move their body a little bit to dodge the attacks and many other things. So it increased their heart rate just because of the physical movement, not necessarily for the environment or the feedback that they received. But we also noticed when we manipulated the heart rate feedback, when we increased the feedback, we noticed that their heart rate decreased, right? So this is, there was a trend. It was not significantly different, but it was very close to significant. I forgot the exact value now, but it was very close. So here that's an interesting thing, because we think perhaps that increase, when the heart rate increased, they probably thought that they're getting agitated or too excited. So probably they tried to calm themselves, and which in turn caused the lower heart rate. But again, this is something that requires a bit more investigation. Right. So overall, what we found in this particular study, that the environments has a lot of, really affects the social presence. So you need to have more interaction and things like that. And also it has environments affect their emotional awareness, and so their raw heart rate. If people have to really move, it will increase their heart rate. And it also increases their, the subjective connection between the two. And the manipulation of heart rate feedback can help self-emotional awareness in the passive virtual environment, when they are not really interacting a lot, but their emotional awareness increases. And also their heart rate can also be manipulated in that. So that's what we found in this study. And overall, in this group of studies, we noticed that social presence increases with shared awareness cue. So if you are planning on developing a collaborative VR system, and you want to increase the social presence, you may consider adding the awareness cue between, or adding the physiological feedback between the collaborators. Right, and also social presence increases when there is higher interaction involved, but it depends a lot on the type of environment that you are creating, right? And also shared physiological feedback can increase collaboration, like we found in our studies. People talked a bit more with each other when they are they were in the environment. Also, we've noticed that it can alter their emotions, but not the real signals, which is also probably something good. So we do not really have to worry anything from the medical point of view. And then also it increases their awareness, but that does not change their action. And here is something I should have mentioned in the earlier study. We interviewed participants after the game, and a few participants said that it was good to know other person's emotional state and what they're going through, but at the same time, we knew that we are playing a game and we are in VR, nothing is real here. So although I was feeling for the other person, but it did not necessarily change my behavior, because in the end of the day, he's going to be safe and alive. They will not die even if we die in VR. So they played their own game, even if we had that feedback. But then it was, our study was done in more of an entertaining setup, right? Or in a game scenario. But if you do this kind of study in a more serious setup, where perhaps teaching and learning setup, or when or a consultation between a doctor and a patient, then it may have a different effect there, right? So from here on, there are a few other steps that we are trying to pursue. Now, like I said in the beginning, that most of the work that I have presented here today was done in when I was working with Mark at UniSA. But now at UQ, we are continuing this work. So what we're trying to do here is to create emotionally and cognitively adaptive interfaces for collaborative learning, training, and also social interactions. And on this point, I'd like to mention that one of my PhD students now are very soon, will probably next week, she will do a focus group with people who are interested in social VR setups, like if you are using AltSpace VR or Mozilla Hubs, then I think she will be very interested to talk to you, or like to invite you for to participate in the focus group. And it will be, again, it will happen in VR. So that's quite interesting. So I will send an email to the group. If you're interested, then you can participate, right? So that's one thing that we are doing. And also another thing, we are looking at how brain synchronization works in collaborative environments in AR and VR. So that the work was led by Mark in the Auckland lab, and also in UniSA. And then so far you have seen the work that I have presented is almost everything is in VR. And we are still finding out what is the effective way of sharing that emotional cognitive states, because people understand heart rate, but they do not really necessarily understand what a galvanic screen response means, or what eye gaze or pupil dilation means. So there are many other things that they do not understand. Now, how can we visualize those things in a way that people can find a meaning out of them, right? Instead of us telling them that this is what it means. So that's one thing. And also those work have been done in VR. So we are now planning to do the similar kind of work in AR to see what differences are there, and whether we can find the similar kind of effect that we found in VR in AR or not. Right. So that's basically from me today. So thanks a lot for attending. And if you have any question, I'd love to answer.
Okay, thank you very much, Arindam.
Thank you.
Are there any questions from within the room, perhaps? Oh, yeah, we'll wait first for students. Look.
Yeah, I just have one question. Thanks for the talk, Arindam. It was just about the choice, I guess, of using heart rate for doing these, for sharing that data. You sort of say that we all kind of understand what heart rate means in terms of your collaborator, but I'm not quite sure that that I necessarily would, and that when I collaborate in my normal life with other people, I don't exactly know their heart rates, and I maybe don't have so much of an idea of what that really means in terms of how they're feeling. I guess there's sort of some use of heart rate and, you know, in films and things like that. But have you considered, or have you tried sort of sharing sort of different things that are maybe more similar to how we actually perceive other people? That'd be my question.
Sorry, can you please repeat the last part? Have I?
Just sort of, could you talk about more how heart rates, do you think that it really is quite a good mapping for understanding how other people are feeling? Like, have you found that to be the case, or do you think there are better signals to share?
Right. Yeah, that's something we thought about as well. So heart rate is something, you know, we thanks for the question. So heart rate is something we commonly understand. Even you know, those kind of it is also used in a lot of movies. So the heartbeat sounds to evoke some kind of a scariness or kind of anxiety, even if you see in movies. So it's quite common. So people understand that you know, they have a perception that heart rate increases when you exercise or when you are worried and things like that. So there is a common understanding people have, which may be right or wrong, but then they understand what they have their own opinion about heart rate. But the other sensors like its galvanic skin response or skin conductance or pupil dilation, these are some of a bit more technical things. Even if you talk about heart rate variability, people think about heart rate, they understand that. But if you say your heart rate variability has increased, people will probably not understand that. Now, when you talk about making these things for mass adoption, then we probably need to work on things that people understand. But at the same time, I totally understand your point. Like you also said, future work, that whether how to present those information to people, right? Also, raw heart rate may not mean much, right? There are a lot of people doing research on how this heart rate or other sensors can be used to measure emotion. All right. So my colleague Chelsea gave a talk last month, and she's doing this kind of research, and there are many others. Now we are planning to use that in future. So instead of saying your heart rate has increased, perhaps we can say now you're getting a bit happy, or you're getting sad, or whatever it is. But then the question is, that's also a complex process, right? The accuracy of it needs to improve a lot before we can confidently say that you're now, this is current emotion that you're feeling. So yeah, it's a very early stage. So there are both sides of it that we need to keep in mind, but we definitely thought about other sensors as well. Yeah, sorry, it's a long answer, but yeah.
But I think there was another aspect to that question, and it was the question actually. So when we communicate in reality, so I don't see your heart rate, right? So I don't know. So I use other cues to probably to guess your emotional state or your arousal or whatever it is. So, and now you're introducing something which is quite, artificial in that case. So what can you make out of it? How would that advance social interaction, right? So to put it that way.
Yes, that's another point, definitely. So this is something we so we miss it in the virtual kind of setup or virtual collaboration, right? When we meet in real life, there are a set of cues, maybe subtle cues that we can get from people, and that helps us having a bit more implicit understanding of the other person. But when you collaborate in VR, we cannot access those things. For example, the facial expression, many others. Of course, people are researching how we can now use facial expression in VR and all, but those things are missing, and we do not necessarily see their body language, their posture. Those things are missing. So heart rate is something is another implicit information about the person, because we are missing those things which we cannot really see in VR, but perhaps seeing something implicit. When I see that I know your heart rate, even if I don't understand what this heart rate really means, but just the fact that I know something implicit about you creates a bit more empathic connection between two of us, right? So that's the logic behind it. But of course, we need to now find out how we can use it more effectively.
Thank you. Yeah. Tobias?
Yeah, I would have a question. Don't you think, like in general, that you need to develop, what should I say, a good model, because basically of our perceptions and about the relations of many things that you mentioned. For example, you mentioned social presence. At the same time, you mentioned empathy. And then it's, of course, all the signals that you exchange. For example, I could argue, like, for example, we say for spatial presence, we say there's a relation between immersion and spatial presence. And we would say it's not so much surprising. So if we increase the fidelity, then we are likely to feel more spatially present. Now I could say similarly, and this is what you showed, that it's not totally surprising if I show more cues, yeah, the people feel just more socially connected, which is also, we would say it's not so surprising. So you see there are certain correlations. At the same time, for example, you said that there are, for some results, you couldn't see any actions. But there's another thing which plays in, because empathy is not exactly the same as social presence, but empathy is is actually also human ability that is different. I mean, very much extreme sociopaths that that lack probably empathy. So that means maybe if you're interested in this, you might need even to screen or I mean, it's a co-founding variable. You might need to do an empathy questionnaire if there is that thing. I think there are several, where you need to screen the people actually to rule that out or to bias that in. So you see no action, but because your participants just by chance didn't have the ability to be empathic, or they had it to different levels. So my point is, you see, there are all these complex relations. Yeah. Do you work on that to express it somehow, to express how this all belongs together or relates to each other?
Yes, that's a very good point. So yeah, totally, because there are so many variables there. So if we can find out a model that can include everything together, and we can do that, that will be really great. So in fact, we now have one of the grant applications currently under review, and one of the deliverables of that application is to find such a model. Right, so it doesn't exist, and you totally understand that having a model like that would definitely help a lot of people, right, and make sense of our research a lot more. So yeah, that's certainly in the pipeline, but we don't have the model yet.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks.
Any more questions? No. No.
I had a question. So I'm just wondering, Arindam, I think I know the answer to this, but have you had much experience yet with these the new VR headsets that have EEG integrated into them? I think you probably haven't yet, have you? Like the Lucid, for example, is now selling the faceplate that has EEG sensors in the faceplate. I'm just wondering with that type of system, you know, how that will enhance your ability to capture emotional and physiological data.
Right. No, we haven't used that. So what we are doing now is using the live amp system, which is like you have as well.
Right.
So that's that thing, and also we are using the emotive Epoch Plus, which is a bit more cumbersome to use with VR, but it still works. But I'd definitely like to try the Lucid thing. Let's see.
How do you find the motive compared to the live amp system in terms of the quality of the data captured? Is it about the same, or is it live amp is better?
No, I think live amp is much better because it's also much higher resolution. So emotive Epoch Plus that we have used is only 14 channels, but emotive has another higher end one, whereas the live amp one we have is I think 32 channels. Although we cannot use all of them just to fit the headset in, and also because of the shape of the emotive, it loses a bit of data at some point because it's more about water based versus gel based. So the connectivity at times is a bit difficult to achieve, but that's why you need to really do it at the very beginning and make sure that everything is fine before put on the headset. And after you put on the headset, you again need to make sure that everything is fine. So yeah, so I would say if you can use the live amp system, but it just takes too long to set up. That's the thing.
Sure, yeah. And well, on the motive, you said it's water-based, is it? So when you put the electrodes on, they start to dry out after some time?
Yes,
okay.
But it works for, so far the studies that we have run, people had to really wear it for a maximum about 20 minutes or so, and it was okay.
Okay, that's good to know. Yeah, we just got the Lucid faceplate now. We have not started testing, but it's not expensive, $300 US, so it's not so bad. So we're just we want to test to see how that, you know, of course you can only measure some of the front, but so how that compares to full cap. And then also, you might not know, but Hewlett-Packard is going to release a head-mount display. The Reverb is coming in November, but they have another version for researchers that will be launched, I think, early next year, that includes heart rate sensing and I think EMG sensing in the display itself.
Oh, wow.
So that means you'll be able to actually record some physiological data from within the headset without having to have rear additional sensors, and eye tracking information as well. So they have pupil dilation and eye tracking. So I think that's going to be, one of my friends is involved in the project a little bit, and so he told me, but I think it's going to be available the first quarter of next year. It'll be more expensive, maybe around $2,000 US for the display. That has all the sensors integrated into it, so it's good for researchers.
Great. Okay, so I definitely like to look at that. Maybe I'll send you an email to get more information
Yeah.
about it. Yeah.
But anyway, it's good for us also to know that the type of work you're doing up to now, you know, we have to wear a bunch of additional sensors. You could imagine within 1 or 2 years, people will have everything integrated in the displays. And of course, as social VR becomes more prevalent, like with the Facebook Horizon and the like, then that's going to be more used in the settings as well. So it'll be very interesting to see how we can use that to represent social information.
Yeah, I think that will be really, really great. Thanks, Mark.
Got an add-on question to Mark's. So it is more like, so you're measuring the frequency bands, or are you also measuring localization as well, or with the cheap EEG devices?
So yeah, with the EEG devices, we are. Oh, sorry, it's Mark. You want to say something?
Me? No, I don't want to say anything.
Okay.
Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah. So yeah, with the EEG device, we are measuring, like, we are collecting data from various lobes. So we measure all the frequency bands overall, but again, those frequency bands have different semantic meanings when it comes from different lobes. So you're also looking at those things as well. Yeah, and also recently Mark's lab did a study with the brain synchronization, where we're looking at the synchronization between two participants and also between right and left brain. So those things are there as well. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Let's see.
All good. Thank you very much again, Arindam, for your talk.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for inviting.
That on Thursday we will have the last talk in the series. It will be from Otago, and then will be me.
Just to make that clear.
and I hope I will see you all on Thursday again. Thank you very much.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thanks. Bye. See you.